You're listening to the Honey Guess What podcast. I'm Dan,
I'm Brynn.
and we've got another episode for you today. Happy New Year, everybody.
Yay, Happy New Year.
Officially 2020. And so I've prepared something that is historical today, and I went and told Brynn that. That's all I gave her. That's all I told her is it's historical, and you said...
Mine's historical too.
So... I'm really hoping...
I'm sure we didn't cover the same thing. There's a lot of history in the world, honey.
There is. I'm hoping that we didn't get inspiration from similar things and go down the same rabbit hole.
So yeah, that's something that I've noticed about our podcast. You can clearly think about like, oh, I know what made him go down this path. I know what made you interested in that.
Right.
Because we, live the same life.
Right. So, fingers crossed. And I'm ready to kick this off when you are. I think Brynn's going to go first this time.
Yes,
right.
I am.
So
I feel like I've been very lucky with the coin tosses. Like I've gotten to go first a lot. But
statistically speaking, it should even out. But
this is what our.
This is number 6. This is number 6. Yeah.
So yeah, we don't have enough raw data yet to know if it's even or not.
No.
I scienced you.
You did.
All right, so I guess if I'm starting, I'll just ask you first. You've been to Boston.
I have.
Are you familiar with a lot of Boston history, not having to do with the Revolutionary War?
Oh, you just took out like a quarter of my information, and then the other like 3/4 is baseball.
It's not about baseball either.
Oh, okay. I probably don't have much information then.
Oh, well then I'm excited. I'm probably going to get to teach you something. My big fear was that you have been to Boston and you will have heard of the Great Molasses Flood of 1919.
No, I have not.
Oh baby, you are about to hear about the Great Molasses Flood.
All right.
It was also known as the Boston Molasses Disaster,
or
the Great Boston Molasses Flood. It's sometimes referred to locally as the Boston Molassacre.
Oh, so actually, I have a fun fact. The Boston Massacre of the Revolutionary War happened on my birthday.
So that's interesting because the Boston Molassacre happened on January 15th of 1919. My birthday is the 17th.
Okay, so what you're telling me is that a Boston
disaster,
a flood of molasses happened in January.
Yes. Yes, I am. I am.
Okay.
But what I'm going to tell you is that this molasses did not flow slowly.
Okay.
So, and I'm laughing, but it's actually very terrible.
It's like the Blob.
So, on January 15th of 1919, in the North End neighborhood of Boston, Massachusetts, a large storage tank burst, filled with 2,300,000 gallons of molasses.
Oof.
The wave of molasses rushed through the streets at an estimated 35 miles per hour.
Wait, what year was this?
1919.
Cars could move that fast.
Neither could people or horses.
Oh, this is horrible.
21 people died.
Oh, no.
150 were injured.
None of them were diabetics, I hope.
Oh, Dan.
What?
No.
What?
That's terrible. It's really horrible, okay? It's really horrible. Because, so what happened was molasses was used in fermenting alcohol, and it was also used in ammunitions.
Oh, okay. I didn't know ammunitions.
Yeah, molasses can be fermented to produce ethanol, which is the active ingredient in alcoholic beverages and a key component in munitions.
Okay, all right, yep.
So the commercial street tank was a huge tank that didn't move. It was like a tank that was on the side, and they would offload molasses from the ships into this tanker, and then it was siphoned off to the different businesses that needed it, the munitions, whatever. Okay, so what had happened was it was cold. It was January.
Mm-hmm.
And they had warmed up molasses from the ship to put it into the tank.
To flow faster.
So it flows faster, right?
Yep.
So they had warmed it up and put it into the tank. The molasses inside was cool, and the outdoor air was cool, so it cooled down pretty quickly. Unfortunately, the next day, the temperature outside rose quickly. It went from well below freezing up into the 40s within only a couple of hours.
So that's like 50 degrees change.
Right.
Yeah.
Plus, there were 2 different viscosities of molasses inside of the tank.
So they didn't probably congeal together anyway.
Right, because one was
So
frozen.
air
and
got inside between the two. Oh.
Also, because it was used for a long time, molasses was constantly being added to it, so some of the molasses inside may have been fermenting.
Oh, okay.
Fermenting gases also expand.
Yeah, they do.
So the tank itself was 50 feet tall, 90 feet in diameter, and as I said before, it contained over 2 million gallons of molasses.
Oh my goodness.
I already talked to you about the temperature.
That's such a huge amount. Like, you say that number, and I'm like, oh my goodness, that's such a huge... I can't really even fathom what that is.
So...
Like, I'm being honest. Like, it's just a huge number to me.
So let me tell you about how tall the wave of molasses was, because this will give you a better idea.
This is perfect.
Not only was the molasses traveling at 35 miles per hour when the tank exploded.
Right.
The initial wave coming out of the tank and down the street was 25 feet tall.
Whoa.
25 feet tall.
That's like 3 stories. Because I think a story is like 8 to 10 feet. I think is what.
That makes sense.
So yeah.
It took buildings off of their foundations. It drowned people and horses.
Yeah.
And also, while people were running away from it,
the
air was cooler than the molasses itself, so the molasses was drying and hardening around people's ankles, legs, chests, in their mouths. There's a report of, this is not funny.
And that's
I'm giggling, but it's not funny.
Old molasses. That's like in your mouth, like So
there's actually a report of a child between the ages of 10 and 12. It's not clear exactly how old he was. That was seen to be surfing on the top, like along the top of the molasses, like waist high, tumbled out of it, hit his head, opened his eyes, and was unable to speak because his mouth was congealed full of molasses.
Ooh.
It was in his hair. Hospitals were like overwhelmed with people coming in looking like toffee apples, is what this article reads. Toffee apples, like candy apples.
Wow.
It was in people's hair. It was in people's clothes. It was in the streets. It got into drainage.
Oh man, I didn't even
basements,
think. The water supply,
water systems. The Boston Harbor was brown all through into the summer because of how much molasses there was.
Boston Harbor has seen some shit. Man. Like, wow.
Tea and molasses.
Tea and molasses, yeah.
They had to use warm salt water to get it off the streets days later, because they were still pulling people out of it because it had hardened. Days later.
Oh.
Yeah. It was really difficult to rescue them because people were trudging through literally inches to feet of molasses in the streets. The wounded included people, horses, and dogs. Coughing fits became one of the most common ailments.
I got the brown lung.
Right? When police and fire brigades came to rescue people, the molasses was still knee-deep. It was a sticky mess for pulling out survivors. The Red Cross, the police, the Army, and Navy personnel soon arrived. Nurses from the Red Cross were said to have been diving into the molasses, pulling people out, while others tended to the injured. This is so terrible, I'm giggling. Many of the dead were so glazed over with molasses that they were unrecognizable.
Like mummified, I'm sure.
Victims were swept into Boston Harbor. Several vehicles and buildings were knocked into the harbor. This is all from molasses.
From in the 1919?
1919. Yep.
Wow.
So, afterward, all these people had been hurt. Some had been killed. There's molasses being cleaned out of the streets. There are buildings that were hurt, all these things. Because of it, local residents brought one of the first major class action lawsuits in Massachusetts
Yeah.
against the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, which owned Purity Distilling, which owned the
Right. Okay. Yeah. For unsafe.
for unsafe practices. Apparently, the company blamed anarchists for blowing it up. But after
Because everyone knows anarchists really want to take down Big Sugar.
right.
That's
Well, it
everything.
was important back then.
Yeah, but
but that's what the company was saying. Oh, it was blown up by people who don't like us, whatever.
right.
But a ton of litigation happened, like 3 years of litigation. And ultimately, they had to pay out $628,000 worth of damages, which is more than $9 million in today's adjusted for inflation.
Still $9 million. That's not much.
Relatives of those killed reportedly received $7,000 per victim, which is the equivalent of $103,000 today.
Yeah. Okay. That's sickening.
It is a little bit sickening. But it was a big deal that this first thing happened, this big first litigation against a company in Massachusetts. It actually affected the way things were built and stuff, safety regulations and stuff, this molasses flood.
And they
from that time on.
And they dealt with all that molasses, but give them 2 inches of snow, and they just still can't.
Well, I don't know what to say to that. Another interesting thing was that I told you the harbor was brown with molasses until summer. Cleanup took weeks. People were saying that things felt sticky, tacky to the touch for over a year afterward.
Well, yeah, that's sure.
In the summer, you could smell molasses for up to 2 decades afterward. People were saying they could smell it in the air when the streets got really hot.
That makes sense. I mean, there's so much sugar that, okay, so
Oh, yeah, like that smell when you walk into a fair and you can smell the burnt sugar of the cotton candy machines. Yeah. And oh, it's a prevalent smell.
Well, and you've made cotton candy before, and it gets in your skin, and you yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Ah.
You feel sticky. Dan's making this thing with his mouth. You feel sticky now just thinking about it, don't you?
I do.
It's disturbing.
It really is.
It really is. It really is. So the rest of my information here is more information about the company and how, why they were doing it this way. They talk about how there was not a lot of basic safety tests that were done.
Mm-hmm.
This tanker had been used for years and years and not had any maintenance done on it. The cracking, after they checked it out later, the cracking happened all along the rivets. People said it sounded like machine guns with the rivets popping out when it happened. So there was, obviously issues with the rivets. It was a really large tank, as I mentioned, and it had only been filled to capacity about 8 times in all the years it was used, and this was one of the few times that it was filled to capacity.
Right.
So that was interesting, too.
Well, I think that's so many times you hear when you're filling something, they either have, a buffer, they tell you not to top up your gas tank.
Right.
Things like that.
Right. Right. So in 2016, a team of scientists and students from Harvard University conducted extensive studies of the disaster, which is where a lot of my information came from. This study they did in 2016.
Okay.
They gathered newspapers and weather maps and those kind of things from that time.
Mm-hmm.
And then also studied the behavior of cold corn syrup flooding a scale model of the affected neighborhood. This research concluded that the initial reports that it was over 20 feet tall and 35 miles per hour were completely and totally credible.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man. That...
Because it's easy to be like, oh, okay, they said it was 25 feet tall, but that's in 1919. Who measured it? They did the research in 2016 and concluded that it was probably accurate.
That's incredible.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. So now I'll tell you the baseball part of it, since you do know about
Oh,
Boston
okay.
baseball. Where it happened, the concrete slab that had been the base of the tank,
Yeah.
it remains in place approximately 20 inches below the surface of the baseball diamond at Langone Park.
Huh. Okay.
So that's the baseball reference for
All
you.
right. Well, thank you. Appreciate
They
that.
did in 2019, just this past year, they had a 100th anniversary event at the baseball diamond. They stood a perimeter of how big the tank actually would have been. They read off the names of the 20 people who had died and had, a moment of silence to remember the
Wow.
Boston Molasses Flood of 1919.
That's. Thank you. That was awesome.
I felt like it was history you would enjoy.
Yeah.
My only fear was that I was going to get started and you were going to be like, oh, I actually know this. And then I would have had nothing to tell you.
I did not know that one. So that's really cool.
But now we also know that slower than molasses in January is probably not accurate when you're dealing with
Now when you're
millions of gallons
No.
of molasses.
No, it just goes where it wants, however fast it wants to.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
wow.
With tsunami height waves.
Oh. Yikes.
You know what you're going to be nightmaring about tonight?
It's going to be the blob. It's going to be the blob. And ugh. Ugh. It's like we have hair on our arms. So
yeah.
even if you shaved your head,
Yeah.
it's all over you.
I told you, toffee apples. The doctor said that the people looked like caramel, that's what they call them back then,
Yeah.
caramel apples.
Oh my goodness. Oh.
Yeah, I don't think you'd ever feel clean again.
No, never. Never would.
Nope.
Wow. All right, so
I hope yours is a little more upbeat than mine.
so I have to tell you, we almost did it.
Oh no.
We almost did it again. We were so close. I'm glad we didn't.
One of these days, we're going to be starting an episode and we're going to be like, sorry guys, we had to delete the last one because we did the same thing.
Right. So, mine for today also deals with problems in understanding fermentation.
No way.
Yes, it does. So,
that's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah. So, I have my notes. Pull them up. Here we go. I think I'm just going to start out. I have a lot here. This might be a little bit of a longer episode. I apologize for that, but I'll try to move along. William I was born around 1028. He was the product of an affair between Robert I, who was the Duke of Normandy, and a woman called Herleva. He was known to a lot of his contemporaries as William the Bastard for a lot of his life. So he had kind of, either because of...
I wish we still had colorful naming
right?
like that.
Exactly. It'd be so much easier to, pick out who you should hang around with. So, probably because of that, he had a bit of a bad attitude, which,
Well, sure.
hence people didn't mind calling him terrible names.
Chicken or the
chicken
egg
or
problem.
the egg thing.
Yeah.
You're not sure which one. So when William asked for the hand of Matilda Flanders, a granddaughter of France's King Robert II, she declined.
She declined, or her family declined?
She did.
Wow, very modern of her.
Probably because of his illegitimacy, or because she was involved with another man,
Right.
like is fine to do. William, according to the stories, he tackled her in the street.
Romantic. And
pulled her off of her horse by her long braids. But in any event, she then consented to marry him.
Yeah, for fear of dying.
Right. And bore in 10 children before her death in 1083.
10 children?
10 children.
Wow.
Okay. So in 1083, when that happened, he was thoroughly depressed.
When she died?
Yes, when she died.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, he obviously cared so much about her, right?
I mean,
But
honey, they had 10 kids.
okay, or valid point. Now, he also had a lot of military prowess. He had a real bad attitude, as I mentioned. But he had during the siege of Alencon, which is a town that was near the border of Normandy, um, in the late 1040s or early 1050s. It's not really too clear when it was. The residents of that town are said to have hung animal hides on their walls, and that was mocking him because he was the grandson of a tanner.
Okay.
And as not everyone might know, that was a profession that was looked down upon because you're dealing with animal carcasses, feces, that sort of thing. It was a literal and figuratively dirty position, and so people were looked down upon if you were a tanner. Okay, so to avenge the honor of his mother's father, he had their hands and feet cut off.
Sure, sounds
Sure.
reasonable.
Yeah. Okay. So, real stand-up, reasonable guy here. So he spoke no English when he ascended to the throne of England. He failed to master it, because, like most nobles of his time, he was illiterate. So, because of the invasion of England, it was successful. French was then spoken in England's courts for centuries and completely transformed the English language.
Interesting.
So, his military prowess and ruthless practices earned him his new moniker, William the Conqueror.
Okay.
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 So,
I mean, frankly, that's a lot better than William the Bastard.
right, yes, exactly. It had some heft to it. People respect it. So he was described when he was younger as strapping and healthy in his earlier years, but he ballooned later in life when he took less active roles in the military. It's said that King Philip of France likened him to a pregnant woman about to give birth.
Wow. They're so classy with their insults.
They are. So, according to some other accounts, he became so dismayed with his size that he devised his own version of a fad diet.
Okay, I'm ready. What is it?
Consuming only wine and spirits.
The booze diet.
Which I'm sure helped his attitude.
Yeah, probably.
Right? I'm sure that made it better. It didn't work.
Yeah, no. Knowing what we know now.
Right.
Isn't that like one of the first big things on diets? They tell you to cut out all alcohol.
Right. Cut all alcohol.
Because it's just sugar.
Right.
Right.
So either because of all of this consumption, or due to during a battle, he was thrown off his horse into the saddle pommel forcefully. He got an infection in his intestines.
Okay.
And so that set in, and it killed him several weeks later. So he had this infection in his intestines for weeks.
Okay.
His priest tried to, so at his funeral, obviously the king dies. Lots of people gather in the church. While the services were happening, I read that a beggar actually came and was claiming that his family had owned the land that the church was built on while the services are happening. He's making this outlandish claim. So there's a lot of drama there. But what was even worse is that when priests tried to stuff him into a stone coffin.
Oh no!
That
Chubby William.
Right.
Oh
no. So.
And he was all infectious.
And he was all infectious.
Little yucky.
And when they're trying to stuff him in, it was too small.
Yeah.
And they pushed on his abdomen.
No.
And it caused it to burst.
No, Dan.
The smell was so awful that everyone in the church ran.
Oh, Daniel.
People were.
I'm disgusted thinking about it.
Right. Okay. So that's part one of what I have to say. November 9th, 1970.
Oh, a lot of time has passed. Where are we now?
In Oregon.
Okay.
A beached whale washed ashore at Florence on the central coast of Oregon.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. I feel like I've heard about, yeah.
Oh, you think you know this?
Well, no, I feel like I've heard about the whale that washed up on the beach in the 70s.
Okay.
And it like sat on the beach for a long time and got real stinky and
Yeah.
gross and yeah.
Okay. So that was happening. What happened to William the Conqueror was happening to this whale. It was in late November or early November, but it was still rotting, decomposing, and people knew by this point that if you don't take care of sepsis, and this is what's going to happen. Like, so.
And you had to imagine it had like undigested food in its stomach that's
Of course.
rotting and all that. Yeah.
Of course. So there's a problem for beachgoers. Even though early November people aren't heading to the beach, it's not going to rot by the spring completely.
Right. And locals, I'm sure, walk on the beach even in the fall and stuff. Yeah, people do that.
And it already starting to smell real bad.
Ugh.
Right. So it's too heavy to lift because it is.
It's a whale.
It's a whale. It's 400. Let's see here. Why did I have the weight on this? It was like 43-foot long whale. It was a sperm whale. And so
whale.
Really big whale. And so it was way too heavy to lift, especially with equipment that they had in 1970. And it was too sandy to push.
Okay, yes, that makes sense.
You can't push it back into the water because you can't get a grip over the sand.
The sand, yeah.
So
what do you do?
So what do you do?
Do you cut it up?
So
like, what do you do?
Thankfully, civilians didn't have to worry about this because this was under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Navy. This particular where it landed, it was under jurisdiction. The Navy was set to handle it. It was determined that the best course of action would be to detonate the carcass using dynamite.
Who decided that? Wile E. Coyote?
It's the military.
Let's just blow it up. That sounds a terrible idea. There's rotty nastiness inside.
Yes, there is.
Oh, damn.
So the hope was that the remaining small pieces would be eaten by area scavengers. So, like, other animals.
Yeah,
okay, that's the idea. George Thornton, the engineer, was in charge of the operation. Told an interviewer that he wasn't sure how much dynamite he was going to need, and also that he was chosen to remove the whale because his supervisor was on vacation.
Wow, sounds like a well thought out plan.
Right. So he's not the one they wanted to take care of it. I want to make that clear. This is not the guy they wanted, but he's the one they got.
I don't know. I'll make it work. My boss is out of town.
Right, exactly.
Got it.
Yeah. A charge of 1/2 short ton, or 450 kilograms of dynamite, was selected. Now, that doesn't mean a lot to you and me. I know that's a lot, okay? But again, like the molasses thing that you talked about, I don't have comparison.
Yeah.
Okay?
A lot.
It's a lot, okay? A military veteran with explosives training, which is what you need in this situation, who happened to be in the area, said that the planned 20 cases of dynamite was way too much. Now, I know a whale is big, but 20 cases of dynamite, I think even I know that's too much.
It seems like an absurd amount.
So, he said that 20 sticks would be enough.
Oh my gosh. So we're talking like...
Yeah.
How many sticks are in a case?
100
maybe?
So there was 450 kilograms that were allocated for this. 20 sticks weighs 3.8 kilograms.
Oh my gosh.
So you're talking roughly 100 times, a little less than 100 times the amount.
I need you to get to the end of this. Did they blow the whale to space? What happened?
So, So his advice went unheeded.
Right. We got dynamite. We're going to use it.
Right.
Oh, no.
This proved to be a poor decision.
I've already gotten there. I need to know what happened next.
So, whale blubber was launched over 800 feet from the blast site.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, my gosh.
So, the problem is only a small portion of the whale was disintegrated. The blast was too big.
It just blew it away instead of demolishing it. It
Right.
just blew it in all directions.
You had one giant gaping hole, but it basically just blew everything that was in that area really, really far.
Oh my gosh.
Most of the carcass still remained and needed to be cleaned up manually by state officials. So their plan that local, scavengers would take care of it, that didn't end up panning out anyway. So what's worse though, they couldn't even be like, oh well, the scavengers will just come and eat the carcass now that there's a giant hole in it, because they tried that, but in the coming days, no natural scavengers came close to the site because the blast was so loud.
You scared
They scared them all away. So the cleanup was way, way bigger than they actually expected.
They made it worse.
They made it way worse. The explosive expert.
Yeah.
Okay, so his brand new automobile, because he had to see this mess. He had to see it happen. Which he purchased during a promotion that was called "Get a Whale of a Deal."
Oh.
So this brand new car was ironically flattened by a chunk of falling blubber.
Luckily, it was a car and not a person. Were people hurt?
I didn't see anything about that. So
they would have reported.
They would have reported that, I would think. So later that day, Thornton, the guy who made this call to put all of this, told it was the Eugene Register Guard. He said, quote, "It went exactly right, except the blast funneled a hole in the sand under the whale, and some of the whale chunks were subsequently blown back toward onlookers and their cars."
It was perfect, except that it wasn't.
Right. He can't admit he's wrong.
Well, no. He made a call. He made a big call.
Yeah. So he was promoted. He was promoted to the Medford office several months after the incident and served in that post until his retirement.
You have to admire, like, there's a certain amount of, like, chutzpah that it takes to make a crazy, ridiculous call, follow through that, say, oh yeah, it worked the way I wanted, with just a little bit of a problem. It's fine.
Right.
And then, like, get promoted.
And then you get promoted. So, let's see here. When he was contacted in the mid-1990s, he said he felt the operation had been an overall success, and and that the incident was a PR disaster that was created by hostile media reports.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Got it.
So currently, or rather, in 1979, when 41 sperm whales beached nearby,
they wanted in on the action, right?
State park officials burned and buried them.
Yeah, that sounds like a better idea.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. Like, couldn't you, like, incinerate them?
Well, state park officials were in charge then, not the military.
Military's like, blow things up. State park's like, let's just burn it and bury it.
Yep. Currently, the Oregon State Parks Department policy is to bury whale carcasses where they land. If the sand is not deep enough, they are relocated to another beach.
Crazy.
So
what you're saying is that when William the Bastard went down, they should have just buried him where he was.
That's the point. Yes.
That's the end point.
That's the end point.
Do you like how I wrapped that up for you?
That was nice. Thank you. So, yeah. Fermentation's important, folks.
Yeah, that's what we learned today.
Yeah. Wow.
Honestly, though, like, I feel like we both need a shower after this.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, there's a lot.
I'm grossed out by your story. You're feeling sticky from my story.
Yeah. I really molasses. It wasn't something that I would think about. But man.
Yeah, rivers and molasses in the streets. Honestly, though, like, blubber flying out of the sky is pretty gross, too.
It really is.
Can you imagine, like, blubber landing in your yard? It's like November, you're prepping for the holidays, and blubber falling from the sky.
Well, and that sound, too. And people were, like, standing around watching it.
Yeah, it was like a thing.
Yeah.
Gross.
Yeah.
Gross.
All right. So I think we just did it. We did an episode.
And it wasn't that long. You were worried. So
yeah, it was not that bad.
All right. Thank you for listening, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
We have a lot of ways for you to listen now.
We do. Yes. We are on YouTube for all of our old content. Everything previously, it's all on there. We are also still on SoundCloud. We are also, though, on Spotify.
Woo woo.
Yeah, we're on Spotify now. This episode will be the first to premiere on Spotify, so that's cool.
That is cool.
We are also on Google Podcasts and Breaker and...
Oh gosh, you can find us all over.
Pretty much anywhere that you get your podcast or could think about trying to get a podcast, search Honey Guess What Podcast.
Yeah, find us.
You'll find us. So.
And please follow us on Facebook if you're listening to us on one of our other platforms right now. Please come find us on Facebook. We do announcements on there. We go live sometimes. It's definitely like where the news is happening. So come find us on Facebook.
Yes. All right. We're going to get out of here. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.